starting with you, Erin.
Erin, you're up.
Bob Mitchell.
Katie Gabriel.
Melissa Campbell, Council.
Sherry Gang.
Dave Alban.
Jennifer Lima.
Angela Boyce Clear.
Okay, awesome. Did everybody get a chance to review the meeting minutes from the last meeting? Okay. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Can I get a second? All in favor? Okay.
I'll abstain.
Abstain. Anybody else need to abstain?
I haven't been to a meeting in a while. I'm sitting in for, just for those of you who don't know, I'm the interim assistant superintendent, and Bob Mezzanotte is out on medical for a short time, so I'm staying on a little longer as the assistant superintendent, interim assistant superintendent.
Okay, so all in favor? Okay, any no's? Okay. All right, awesome. So, I got everybody's responses to the equity audit ratings and their individual recommendations. I had a question. Dave is coming. He just said that he might be stuck in traffic because he was coming up from Connecticut. He will be here. I had a question on his before we could review it. So I think I will skip over his for now, and then we will come back to that, because he had some questions about how we had, just in terms of the numerical value, he was looking at it differently from how we had talked about it. So I want to wait for him to be here to have that discussion. So if everyone is okay with it, I'll start with the second agenda item, which is the proposed membership recommendations. I had put together kind of like a summary based on what we had talked about at the last meeting in terms of term limits, proposed membership makeup, and ways to fill that. Did everybody have a chance to look at that? I'm sorry that we're here again and I don't have a screen that we can share, because I know that it's easier. Oh, there's Steve. So I'll leave it since he's here, because that's the number one thing, and we'll flip back to the equity audit recommendations. Hi Dave, thanks
Hi.
for rushing here.
Sure.
I appreciate it. We just got started. I was gonna bump to the second agenda item, but now that you're here, I'm gonna go back to the equity audit recommendations. You had sent me that email about how we had scored the resource item and the value for it, and I think you were looking at it differently as how we had discussed it in the group, so I just wanted to talk about that quickly.
Sure, yeah, apologies. So I may be looking at it the wrong way, clearly. So there's those 6 subcategories, if I remember correctly. And each subcategory we rank 1 to 3, with 1 being lowest and 3 being highest. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, I'm opening it up right now, yeah.
Wish I could. Oh, there it is. Okay. And so as you rank them, it gives a composite score that ranges, if I'm remembering correctly, I'm bringing it up now, from 6, which would be the case if you gave every category a 1, right, to a high of 18, which is what the score would be if you gave every category a 3. Yeah, priority score, right?
Yep.
And I guess what I was seeing is that the last 2 subcategories, the resources required and the effect on other systems, are things that we don't want to be high, right? We want those things to be low. So it seems like those 2 categories should be reverse scored, so that if you give them a 1, in other words, if you think that the resources required are low, then that should actually get a 3 in the composite score. And if you think the effects on other systems are low, it should get a 3 in the composite score. but when I ranked them, I felt like it was still coming up the opposite way, right? That if you give it a 3, that priority score was going up. It wasn't reverse scoring it. At least in my version of the Excel file. So in other words, if I give them all a 3, I get the priority score of an 18. Is that making any sense?
Yes.
Okay.
So
So
I
it
think-
seems like an easy fix. It seems like an easy fix where if you just make it so that a score of a 3 actually adds only 1 point to the composite score, and a score of a 1 has 3 points.
So I think we had looked at it the opposite way, right, where we had scored it the highest or the lowest, right? That's the way the group had looked at it, we had looked at it the opposite way. So, like, for the one I looked at, just kind of like confirm how we were talking about was, the one, like, for student voice, because that one had, like, no cost, let me find that one, which line is that, one is line number.
Is it 24-ish?
Increase opportunities for student voice, so it's, item number 24, row number 27. So, for resources, you know, most people had rated that either an 8 or a 9. So that was kind of like, meaning, in terms of total resource, because we just took like the lump sum number from each person. So I think that's the opposite of what you were saying, correct?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, like, if you take that as an example, right? If you think that's really easy to implement, like, what I guess I'm thinking is a perfect score would be, for that, would be one where you think that's really easy to implement, so you give it a 3. You think that there's very few resources required, so you give that a 1. And you think that there would be very few negative effects on other systems, so you would give that a 1. And you would end up with a 5 in resources.
Okay.
Right? I mean, that's the way I'm looking at it. Like, if on the other hand, you think that it's still ease of implementation is high, so you give it a 3. The resources required are really, really a lot of resources required, so you give it a 3. And really gonna have some big negative effects on other systems, so you give that a 3. Now you get a perfect score of 9. So that's what I'm saying, like, because those last 2 columns are bad things, like, they need to be reverse scored.
Yeah, or the question should have been like need for high resources, or
Right.
low, like, you know, it could have like, yeah, so.
Yeah.
But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but
You all reversed your score is what I'm hearing, so that you just need to reverse your score.
Okay, so
you
you're
would
saying
give it
in
a
the
3
rating,
and a
what
1.
you did was you said, if there's a lot of resources required, I'm gonna give that a 1.
Correct.
And if there's few, okay, so then the scale for those last 2 columns are not 3 is high and 1 is low.
It's opposite.
it's opposite.
It's opposite, okay.
Yes,
I
You're
missed
right,
that.
yeah, no, you're
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
but.
I missed that, I just didn't see that.
No,
I
no,
just
no,
didn't-
that's fine, it's just you are the outlier here, so I think it would be easier if you just changed yours.
That's no problem.
Yeah,
I
okay.
just didn't see that reflected anywhere, that the last 2 columns should be rated. So if we ever share this methodology,
Yeah, no, we will definitely.
we would wanna say the
yes,
last 2
yes,
columns, the
absolutely.
scale is reversed.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
make a note of that.
Yeah, we
No
can
problem.
definitely make a note of
I'm
that.
in the same way, and I did reverse them.
Okay.
Okay, we reversed yours while
I
we were
reversed mine,
talking.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's what I thought.
So then mine is, I would need to go back in and reverse mine and I can resubmit it to you
Okay.
with them all reversed.
So do we wanna talk about membership while Dave does that, and then while I plug those in, and then we can come back to that?
I'm just gonna make sure nobody's outside too, that everyone was able to get in before
Okay.
they left the door.
I just wanted clarification, I wasn't here at the last meeting. So with the students where it says, in the explanations, students till they graduate.
Yes.
So does that mean if they come on, there's 2 students, but those 2 students would remain? So if you came on as a freshman, you'd be here for 4 years?
Yep.
And no one else could get on?
I think that with the proposed, it was to have 3 students, and so,
Or 3, yeah.
so if, you know, if they were all freshmen, then they would stay through all 4 years. If it was a freshman and a junior and a senior, the membership would stagger depending on when they graduated. But the option would be there for them to stay through their whole, you know, high school career if they wanted to do that.
It seems like it would lock it in that other students may not have an opportunity if they're locked in for 4 years. Or, you know, or even one freshman, 2 sophomore, you know, or like that combination, maybe not, like it could happen.
It could, yeah.
And then it just feels like there could be, you know, like not another opportunity for another student, or to stagger it a little bit, other students.
And can I ask, are we limiting to high school students?
You know, that's a great question, and I thought that too. The way it stands now, we don't have any type of group in the middle schools. So I feel like my thought is until we establish a group at the middle school, either an REA or, an REI or a GSA, it wouldn't make sense to have a student serve. I would love to see us start something like that in the middle school so that we could have a student sit with us. And I don't know, maybe it's the other way, maybe we have a student sit and then we establish it, like, but whatever the group thinks is best. But I was thinking that as I was going through this, because I definitely think we need something at the middle school in terms of a group. There were so many, I don't know where I was, but so many middle schools have like GSAs and we don't have that, and I don't know why. You know, so I definitely think having a middle school voice, would be good, but I don't know if we can have that without the existing group, or if it's that you're gonna manage it with this scenario.
So in that case, then, would the middle schooler be on for more than 4 years? If the language is that they would graduate,
Right.
but there's an out for them, like the language would be if they choose.
If they choose, yeah. Yeah, it's not, like, we wouldn't make you do it until you graduate. And the way it stands now, like, so right now, we have 1 member who is gonna be a senior next year. And then, so in theory, if we said we wanted to go with 3 students, we could define, since we have a senior, we would want it to be either open it up for any age, or we could say it should be a freshman, sophomore, and you know, like, we could define the year so that it wasn't for freshmen who are then, you know, blocking that opportunity out for any other students, like, so it's whatever we, and again, we're just making recommendations to school committee, would say that's a horrible idea, like, but it's, so it's whatever we as a group think is, you know, works best for this situation.
Yeah, it's nice to have the movement, you know, because things change and people, and even as you're bringing up the middle school piece, it's such an important piece, and both middle schools have such 2 different cultures of there, so it'd even be nice to have, you know, not just like, you know, if we decide to do that, you know, but. I don't have an answer. I'm
like anxiously waiting for you.
I know, it just, when I read that, I just was like, oh, it would be, like, if I was a high school, like, I'd be like, oh, wow, that's something, and like, sometimes people don't find their voice till they're little, and it would just be like, oh, wow, but that's already taken.
Right.
And, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's popular, but I'm kind of leaning on like limiting it to maybe a 2 to 3 year term. And that, to force the rotation or
The
whatever.
rotation.
Well, I was gonna
for
ask
new
that
voices.
too, like, that's on the agenda to talk about term limits, and so would that also apply to the students
Yeah.
that we have on, or, you know, if they came on as middle school, a sixth grader could then potentially be on for 7 years, I mean, if they.
And I also wanna be like, do other great things. This isn't the only great thing you can do.
Right.
Like,
So should there be term limits, and should they be the same for everyone, including the students that choose to join or apply?
Can I just throw out there too, like, personally, I feel like there's a too young to be on the committee. I mean, I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm the outlier there. I mean, I feel like it's great to have student representation, excellent, like needed, necessary. But I feel like junior, senior, like, I feel like there's a too young to understand sort of like the scope of the issues, the gravity of the issues, like the context.
I would, I would disagree on that, yeah, I think they're seeing it, it may not be to the sophistication or but they're going to have a voice to say, well, when this happened to me or my friend, this is how it's
They are
rolling out.
living it.
Like they all, when we talked about late buses, they had that, they could speak to that. So some they may have to defer or, you know, but I think, and what a great opportunity on top of that, you know, so.
I mean, Chloe is a junior this year, and this is her,
She's a senior now.
well, senior, but I'm saying a junior, and this was her second
She was a
year?
sophomore
She
when
was,
she
a-
was
she was a
on
sophomore when she came on, yeah.
I think your point's valid, I think it depends on the student, and also like what we're looking for from the student on the committee. You know, like, if it's the role of the student representative, and I think making sure to outline that piece, is to be the building representative from their school, or like the age representative from their school, and that their goal of being on the subcommittee is to communicate things that they're seeing at the middle school level, at the high school level. That's very different than being a contributing member of a subcommittee. You know, like, it's, you know, if our expectations are, hey, we wanna hear about what you all are experiencing at the middle school level in these areas, and like things that we might be able to do to improve that, then I think the age part, it doesn't matter. But if it's something different, if we're looking for like a senior that's going to be like kind of that mature level voice, then that's very different, I think. And I think that's at the discretion of the subcommittee to decide kind of what is the purpose of the student representatives, and what are we hoping that their contribution will be, and what are we hoping to learn from them to be able to implement.
Yeah, so one nuance in there, and again, you may all disagree with me, and that's totally
Okay.
fine, but one nuance in there is, you know, you can have a committee, like a non-voting committee member, you know, and obviously we're passing everything to the school committee anyway, so it's not like anything to do with binding, but we do take votes every once in a while, you know, I mean, that would be another middle ground, but you may disagree with that as well, and that's fine. I mean, to me, I guess I feel like someone who's 13 or 14, I have kids that age, right? And I think of my kids that age, and I think, I just don't know that they have the maturity to understand that, you know, and representation, I get that part, right? Like, this is what's going on, this is what my friends are saying, like, that's very helpful. But voting, I don't know, and we can disagree, that's fine.
Yeah, I feel like if they have, voice without vote is inequitable. You know, like, I would want them, if they're here at the table, I would want them to be able to vote on issues as a representative. And if they make a choice based on how they feel as a 13 or 14-year-old, like, that's their vote and that's their choice.
There are other examples of that,
Yeah.
there are other examples that, like, for example, community members can come and
Oh, yeah.
share.
Yeah, but if they're, my personal opinion is if they're gonna be at the table and they're gonna be invited to be on the subcommittee, then they should have a vote, just like you or you or you or whomever. That's just my thought. But I do think, going back to the part that you all were talking about with, like, should they stay on if they were voted when they were in sixth grade, should they stay on until their 12th grade? I think, what I think would be really interesting is like I said, having different level voices, like knowing, you know, having representatives from the middle school. So like if you were on as a 7th grader, like, if you then, when you get to high school, like, you might still be a valuable member, but that's taking a different spot or a different, like, space, and then you would still want to backfill with a middle schooler, if that makes sense. Like, I think having those different representations from the different levels of school would be important. So how we write that could be whatever, it could be that your term is the amount of time that you're a building representative, or like it's building like middle school representative kind of vibe, and then if you get on when you're in sixth grade, like you could have a 3-year term, or if you get in on eighth grade, then you have a 1-year term. Like depending on kind of how the rotations
Right,
move
right.
kind of vibe, you could do something like that perhaps.
How are they going to be, are they going to write an essay, or how are they going to be, like, what's the process to?
When we did it before, the process for the student representatives was the same as it was for everybody else, and I don't see any reason to have it be different. I had also sent with that recommendation, the markup of the application process from the last time. So that's something else that we can talk about, is changes to that. Did anybody have any other questions, comments on the proposed makeup, the term limit, anything?
Can I just say, so I know Aaron, I heard what you said, and Sherry, I heard what you said, but I just wanted to see if what I propose has legs, and if everybody disagrees, I just want to give other people, like, too young, you know, I'm thinking high school,
No, I
you
think it
disagree,
should be
and
middle school.
others disagree with that. Middle school should be okay, and if you're on the committee, you definitely vote, even if you're in middle school. Everyone agrees, okay, no problem.
I think if we have the process, the application, whatever, ideally that process should give us a number that can sit at this table and vote.
Yeah.
And so then if it's 3 students that are in the proposed, would we be proposing, you know, 1 from each middle school, 1 high school, or did we, you know, if we're kind of.
So I didn't have middle school in mind when I did this. I had 3, because what we talked about before, to always make sure that we had like some student voice here, and knowing that high school students have a ton of stuff. So I would make the recommendation that we set 3 high school, 1, and, you know, I don't wanna make the group so large, but I think there's a definite difference between the 2 middle schools, so I
You do
don't.
2 high school and 2 middle school.
Yeah, 2 high school and 2 middle school.
And if it's both 2 students from EMS, that's okay, like it doesn't always have to be 1 and 1, but at least that would give an opportunity if there were students at both buildings that
Right.
were interested.
I would maybe consider a language too that gives flexibility, because if there aren't students interested, I'd rather have 4 high schoolers than
Mhm.
only
Right,
2
right,
or
right,
2
right.
vacancies,
Yeah.
so.
I think the way it would be like ideal makeup,
Yeah.
or like, you know, proposed, you know.
Yeah, there are 4
some-
student representatives,
Yeah.
ideally 2 from the high school,
Right.
1, 2 from the middle school level, but
Yeah,
some students are better than no students.
so that if we got all high school and no middle school applicants, or all Whitford and no Jakes, or vice versa, we can fill it with the people who want to be. And also the people who, you know, if we got, you know, I would rather have the best qualified candidates versus just to fill, you know, spots.
Yeah.
Do we need to be more specific about parents on the committee also, like parent of an elementary school student, parent of, like in an ideal situation, parent of a high schooler?
Yeah, we could do that. With the same caveat, like that's the ideal, and, you know, that won't necessarily happen.
Some of us fill more than 1.
With those parents, have the same opportunity to maybe go beyond a 2-year or a 3-year term if they move to, their child moves to the middle school and then high school?
I think in order to roll things over for 2-year terms, like it would be like 2 years, sit out, come back. Like that's the way I would look at it. I don't know what anybody else thinks. We're trying to stagger things this first year in order to have to have some. Yeah, you know, but then, once we have some existing and some new, there will always be some, you know, it won't be a whole new board at one point, you know, so, cause otherwise you could in theory go, okay, elementary, middle, high school, community, like, you know, you
Right,
could
that's
really
true.
kind of like work your way through for a 12-year term if you wanted to.
It's a whole child.
if you all already talked about this at the meeting I wasn't able to attend, but sometimes it's good to have language in that allows for somebody to do like an additional, like 2 consecutive terms and then have to have a roll-off year, just in case, like, you don't have membership and there are people kind of mid-progress, so like if you were kind of championing a initiative and your term's up, like, then not having the loss of momentum and stuff, and so, you know, I think ideally you would have turnover and different folks, but like maybe putting in some language to allow for, if it makes sense, for somebody to maybe re-up or do like an additional year to finish up a project kind of vibe or something like that, might be something to consider.
Like the sorry, you can't leave language.
Yeah, or just like, you know, you don't wanna have somebody that's willing and able and like in the middle of something have to
And then they have to
leave.
leave, right, no,
Because the
makes
way that
sense.
you write
Yep.
something, and so I do very much believe in turnover and having new voices at the table and different things, but I think sometimes when you're creating a procedure like this, like thinking through like the what ifs, like, and not putting yourself in a box where you can't have somebody who's, should be staying on, stay on, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
sense.
Just something to think about though, it's if you all feel really strongly you want 2 years and you're out no matter what, like, that could be proposed too.
Before we move on to the actual application, does anybody have any other thoughts or comments, questions, things? No, I think that's an awful idea. Anything on this actual?
Just, what is, I wasn't here, OFL rep stands for?
Oh, it's the Office of Family Learning.
Okay.
It's the office within the school department that works with the families in the Davisville, Minnesota area. And it was brought up at the last meeting that it would be helpful to have like a rep from that office.
Sure, okay.
I'm sorry, Jen, it looks like other people are looking at a document that has this.
Yeah, it was sent out, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'll find it. No, no,
I'll
not
send it
bad.
to you right now.
And how many total are we proposing for the?
So with the proposal, it would be 14 members plus the 3
I see.
admin school committee members.
Thank you, sorry. Gotcha, I hear you, thank you.
Okay. And right now, we have 11 plus 3, so it's basically adding 3 members and kind of shifting some of the other ones. So, actually, and I gotta add this because we just talked about, would make it 4 students, right? So really it'd be 15 members. And that wouldn't be, like a defined number, that would just be kind of what we would aspire to. It would be locked in. So we're saying student, we're saying 2 high school, 2 middle school, right?
And then language too, I think that was good, but Erin, about if the middle, if they're not filled, it could be the other composition too.
Language around term limits as well, right? And are we saying that students would have the same 2-year term limits that everybody else would?
So once that starts going, we really need to put out the application annually, pretty much.
Yes.
Ideally, and this might not be next year, but ideally, like, we would have like a time, like, that makes sense for like the school calendars of like when all vacant subcommittee postings are available, you know, like to be able to, so that we can send out like, hey, these are all the opportunities to get involved on, you know, different school committee, subcommittees, you know, I would like to have it be a little bit more like predictable for folks, and try to get it aligned so that it's easier for folks to understand and then the terms make sense, so you're not having like some committees roll off in November and so, you know, like, I think we could probably try to align
Yeah,
it, so.
consistency amongst.
Yeah,
all.
but then annually you would get that, okay, it's July, these are due on this date and so on and so forth, or whatever makes sense.
Did the students have to get parents' permission to submit an application? They fill out the same exact application, right?
They had to get permission to join. I don't think they had to get permission to apply, but they did have to get permission to actually officially become a member, yes.
And for videotaping and things like that.
And videotape, yeah, yeah. Okay, and then, for, you know, the existing members would be able to remain for one more year if they wanted to. So, and not to turn over the whole committee, but then if, you know, didn't, that would be fine too. If all 4 parents wanted to remain, you know, one person could move into the community spot. As you just talked about, you know, moving around. And the teachers, of course, could remain also if they wanted to, so all that could be worked out, after. So, does anybody want to propose a different makeup? Or are we okay with proposing this? Which would be 3 parents, ideally high school, middle school, elementary school, 3 teachers, ideally high school, middle school, elementary. The elementary is the new one, a special ed rep, which is new, OFL rep, which is new, 1 administrator, 2 community members, 4 students. That makes 14 members target, and then the 2 school committee members and the academic member for 2-year terms with flexible language around the makeup of the positions and flexible language around term limits.
15, since we added the 4th student.
It is 15, thank you, yes, I have 14.
When we're writing it, I'm assuming we're just saying parents, but we're typed parents and guardians.
Yes, yes, yeah. Anybody want to make that motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the motivation.
Would anybody like to second that? All in favor?
I actually I would technically vote against because I wouldn't have the middle school students.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. All right, so now, can we look at the application and discuss that? Did you find the email, David, that started?
Yes.
You did, okay. So what I sent was the application that had been sent out initially. I put a few red line markups in it, but I want to open that up for discussion.
I found question 9 to be difficult to answer when filling this out initially.
So would you like to strike that? Do you think we should change it? What do you think is the?
I think if maybe people were given a choice between what they might answer, if they wanted to answer 9, I'm certain they could. But then what you wrote in, please provide an example of demonstrated experience advocating for issues. So maybe one or the other. You had a choice there.
I would just disagree because then we would lose out on the ability to look at 2 different applications and gauge between answers of the same question, like much like any kind of job interview, when candidates receive the same question, then you can rate based on their answers. And if we give them choice and they choose not one, then we have
We
full
can make
assumptions.
That's true.
Is it the wording? Like, is it the lived experience?
It is. When I read it, it felt almost like, I don't know an appropriate word for this other than what I'm about to say, but it felt like trauma porn. And
What if we change it just to say, I hear you. Please share what is motivating you to want to serve on this committee.
yeah, I think so.
Cause I think that matters, right? Like,
It
why do you
does.
wanna be on this committee
Right.
is a little bit different than like what lived experiences have led you to wanna be on this committee. It shifts the question a little bit less to what you're saying, but still gets behind the motivation of maybe why you would wanna serve on this.
And I don't think that was the
Compromise?
intention
No,
of
it
the
wasn't,
question
but
to
when I read
begin
your
with.
application, I was like, oh,
Thank
I'm
you
so
for
sorry,
reading
what are
that.
you doing?
It's
But no,
very
because
valid.
it's true, yeah.
And so that would be my recommendation, but I'd be open to others, thoughts on how we could tweak that question.
I think we had a similar question, at least when I applied, there was a similar question like that, like why are you applying?
This is was the old question, right?
This was
Yeah.
the question,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the intent of this question was to ensure that we had people on the committee who were personally motivated is not the right word, but who were going to be committed to working towards the issues that we are trying to solve here. And that was the intent of the question. And it certainly wasn't to relive, yeah, you know what I mean? But I certainly
Yeah, I can see the impact.
don't want to
without the intent.
engender that response in anybody else, you know what I mean? So if there's a better way to phrase that, we should certainly change it.
I like the simple why.
Why? So what are we gonna change it to, please?
I had suggested just taking out, so please.
Share a lived experience.
Yeah,
Take that out.
yeah, just take out share a lived experience that is, so just read, please
So,
briefly share
What is motivating?
what
you
is
the most?
motivating you to want to serve on this subcommittee. That's like the simplest version.
It's motivating, yeah.
If you wanted to tweak it to get towards the, purpose of the committee, you could tweak
But
it.
that's all stated
Yeah.
up on the top.
Oh, but I was saying, like, if you wanted to connect the question to that of like, something about, cause what I heard Jen say is like that you were hoping to have a question that would say like, you know, we're looking for members that are committed to doing what the subcommittee's purpose is, can you expound on that for us? Like, how do you believe, like, what do you believe in as far as committed to that? And I don't know if what, I just tweaked that question to, we'll get to that, but maybe it
I don't
will.
think it will, but I think when, one of my suggestion from last
adding
time
your-
that Jen
yeah.
added will,
Yeah.
and I have an edit for that.
Yeah, adding your question gets to that other,
Perfect.
yeah.
Just a minor point, but for number 4, should that say like if relevant, because isn't it possible that someone is, you know, like I teach at another child? that-
Yes, yeah.
Or, I don't know, if relevant, something like that, I don't know. Cool.
Well, yeah.
So if a parent has a child who goes to private school, not in our town, are they a community member?
I would say, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because they're not a parent of an NKSD student.
Jen, on that, can you just make it parent or guardian?
Yeah, all of
On
these
the
will change
things,
to that, yeah.
perfect.
For questions 5, 6, and 7, could there be a prefer not to answer
Yes,
option?
yep.
I couldn't tell Jen on that one for number 5 if the other had like a fill-in.
It did not, but we can certainly.
Okay, cause
add,
it looks
yeah.
like number 6 might have,
Yes.
and so I would just make it consistent
Yeah.
if folks wanted to self-define.
7 does too.
Yeah, I think it probably wasn't
Yeah.
intentional, but just if you're going back and making tweaks
Yep.
to an application, I would tweak that.
Could we like add a couple of boxes too, cause.
We can do whatever we want to do.
An agent, that's not
Yeah.
a box, so I like to see that and and even multiracial.
Yeah. What else?
Is the application confidential?
It's confidential, actually, I have to say no, it's not, because we had an issue where somebody challenged us and we had to share, they were accurate and they were shared. And I don't know if that's something that we want to,
I prefer us to disclose it.
yeah, and it was not disclosed, and that was something that was a difficult moment, so that's probably something that we should.
Yeah, I've been erring on the side of anything that we send out has that disclaimer.
Yeah.
Because of the, Access to Public Records Act.
That's a great question, Bob, thank you.
don't even remember what I wrote on this application, what's going out to the public.
I think that's a setting on the Google form, so I can make sure that that form is set up that way. Like that's how you set the form up. So we can make sure that we do that this time.
And I believe even though they were published, not made public, but sent out to people, I think identifying information was still.
Yes.
Yeah, it would
yes,
be,
yes.
it would be
Redacted.
redacted,
Yes.
of course,
Personal
yeah.
information was redacted, but all the answers were,
I just think that's important for folks to
Yeah.
know. But yeah, we would of course redact.
It's still easy to kind of
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
And that would only be if it was requested in that, it's not that it would be automatically
right.
put out, it would be if required by law.
And it goes the same for minors?
No, the minors were accepted, but we had to fight for that to keep the minors' information.
And we can check with the district lawyer too before a form, they're very good about helping us work through, what we need to do to comply with the state laws.
Jen, I have a few things whenever you're ready.
Yes, I'm ready.
Three should just match what we had just said in terms of the membership, so like if we have like OFL rep or
Yep.
like some of the new ones. Six, I believe the language for gender should be men, women, trans man, trans woman, non-binary, prefer to self-identify. So male should be man, female should be woman, because
Okay.
that's biological language.
Okay.
And then the note on what I had suggested that you added under number 10, the please provide an example of demonstrated experience advocating for issues in DEI, et cetera. I actually think we can make that even scrolling, on the top where it has the strategies, I wonder if we put the same language in. So demonstrated experience, advocating for issues related to anti-racism, cultural competence, cultural responsiveness, the stuff that's in number 2 and 3. Because if those are the listed strategies, goals of this committee, and we want a question that has, show us your commitment and your experience, that's gonna hit that.
Okay, so tally in the things listed in strategy number 2.
Or addressing, you could prompt like addressing the things that are listed above,
Okay.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So expand that
Use-
question.
Use the actual word.
Yes,
so
to
that-
include that specific language in number 2, okay. Okay. And then I added the note, because we had talked about, an interview process. What are people's thoughts on the interview process? I see some yeses, some cases, some,
Do other committees have interviews, other subcommittees?
they do not.
How does it work then? It's just the school committee appoints, is that how?
So,
Superintendent officially makes the appointments.
are you sure?
That's per the policy, superintendent.
Was it the policy or when this subcommittee got it? Because I think this subcommittee is the only one that has, each subcommittee has different parameters based on different things. So for example, the Health and Wellness Committee, their membership is dictated by a state kind of mandate. And then the Building Subcommittee, very similar, has some state tie-ins to membership in different things. And so this subcommittee, and then the newly defined policy subcommittee are the only two that our school committee has that are not defined by state regulations. And so I think this DEI one was probably the most formal process, that the school committee had in my recent memory. And then the policy subcommittee one, was kind of created, and that process was formulated through, a policy in the school committee, but it doesn't have like external membership, it's really administration and school committee members on that one, and so it's different, and so this one, there's not a benchmark, is a long way of what I'm saying. And that's kind of what we're hoping to create on that side. But knowing that you all went through kind of a formal process, that's where it's really helpful to get feedback from you all, because then the school committee can kind of make an overarching, like, this is how folks get on a subcommittee kind of procedure, policy XYZ, and so right now, there's no formal process for that, and so there's no formal interview process, and I don't believe any subcommittees are conducting interviews for membership. That's a long answer, but.
So right now, the current language is all members are to be proposed by the superintendent and approved by the North Kingstown School Committee. So does that mean that all of the applications then go right to the superintendent, and the superintendent decides which of those then, so like, we would never see those applications? That's my question.
The committee does not see the applications.
So it goes right, so they're like applying them and go back to the superintendent?
The process the last time was the chair and the co-chairs, which was,
The school committee member and
school
an
committee
admin.
member and the admin, with the superintendent, reviewed the applications. And then the superintendent recommended
Made the
to the
recommendations to
school
the school
committee.
committee. If you all want to, that's something you all could discuss and propose to the school committee about that process and what that looks like. Because like I said, we're kind of doing a process and building like formalized processes at the same time. So we would welcome thoughts on that.
Seems like one thing that's important, and it's sort of implied in the charge, but it's not explicit, is what the criteria would be for selection. And it seems like that's really important, right? Regardless of who it is that's making the decision, that there's explicit criteria for how applications are being judged.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think also like letting folks know that like preference, like at certain times will be given, based on the need for the makeup of the committee. So like you could have two amazing applicants, that are equally credentialed, but you might choose to select one because they are a middle school representative, and that's something that the committee needs at that moment. And so I think having that be understood as well is really important, in addition to whatever we determine the criteria is for selection, but I do agree that being transparent about that is important.
Is it okay to say, I don't know if it's okay to say, as part of those criteria, that we want I think, or I would want a diverse makeup of the committee. Here I am, white male, saying this, right? But like, I think that's important, right? Like, we have a diverse makeup of the committee. It seems like if we can be explicit about that, we should be explicit about that, if others agree. If that's what we
I
want.
agree with the words, but as one of the few folks of color
Yeah.
at this table, I don't wanna be, like, I don't want people to think I'm the token.
Sure,
So
sure,
like,
yeah, yeah.
I think a rubric of some sort
Yeah.
needs to be like transparent for the public so that folks know I earned the spot.
Right,
In
that makes
sense,
sense,
like,
totally, yeah, yeah.
And I think we gave the option is that you don't have to answer, and then it would be working against you if you chose that. You know what I mean?
I think like if there's a rubric or scoring card or whatever we call it, that it's based on not the check boxes, but it's based on the why, what's motivating you, question 10 that has a lot of words, the provide examples, like that's what we're looking for members here. And that, like, not that we're ignoring the identity related questions. I guess,
Those are the drivers.
right.
I think too, considering like, for example, like on the building subcommittee, I think there's a specific position that has something to do with architecture background, right? Like for their profession, like that's one of the mandated positions, I believe, from, whatever. And so, I think like the importance of having folks that have, background in certain areas or professional experience in certain areas or XYZ, is probably something that we could rubric very easily, but I definitely think, being careful about like identity is important, and then also making sure with legal, like we don't wanna be accidentally exclusive while we're trying to be inclusive. But I definitely think there could be some criteria around like specific like work in certain areas that tie to this. Cause I know that with the other subcommittees that, like the nutrition one, same thing, they want people that have dietitian backgrounds and nutrition backgrounds and different things like that. So I think there's definitely some merit in that sense. And sometimes those things are, you know, allow you to have a more diverse committee, and sometimes you just get really great experience. And so I think just considering that would be important. But I do agree, a rubric or some sort of thing would be important.
So
something you
your
agree with that maybe.
interview, no, rubric, yes.
I guess what would be the purpose, or, I'm not opposed to an interview, but I would wonder, like, how does it differ from the written application? And still, I would believe that the questions in an interview have to be consistent for all candidates, and then we still have the scoring rubric or whatever. So is it, what can we ask in person that would add to a written application?
I don't think anything, somebody had brought it up, so I wanted to make sure we discussed it.
Are we talking about interview with us or like interview with the
No,
superintendent and
interview
the school
with
committee?
the selection committee, yeah.
And the selection committee would be,
Yes.
Chairs of-
If you had done, based off the old model, it would likely be the superintendent or an administrative designee and the chairs of the subcommittee.
Yeah.
At current moment, like that,
Yeah.
without having, that specific guidance.
I think a rubric is probably a more impartial way to do it.
And getting back to the fact that there are not interviews for all the other subcommittees, you said? Like, you don't interview people to be on the health and wellness committee or the building subcommittee.
The only thing that's happened, in my experience in the past 6 months since I've been on the school committee is, you know, when someone or, you know, someone's interested in being on a subcommittee, this has not been in a competitive process, this has been we've had a human that
Right.
is interested in being a subcommittee.
As a whole.
As a chair, I've had a conversation with them and just, you know, talked through, you know, hey, I heard thank you for submitting your application, wanted to check in and see if you had any questions about the role, is there anything that you want us to know about your experience, you know, coming onto the subcommittee, so I've had a conversation. By no means an interview,
Yeah,
because it
that's
hasn't
a
been,
little different,
the couple that we filled haven't been like that, but there has been a conversation, because I think that helps both sides kind of understand the expectations of the role and get clarity. If I was coming on to something, I would wanna have that opportunity, so I don't know if we wanna work that into the formal process, but I don't know if you wanna do an evaluated interview, there's a lot of bias in that, based on how people present, how they can, you know, people have different skills that might not translate to the conversations that we'll have here, and so I actually think it adds additional layers to it, and it might defer some people who might not, you know, they might say, oh, I'm not willing to do an interview, so I don't wanna participate, and I think when you're curating a community or a subcommittee like this, you wanna have as few barriers as possible, so.
I think like for me, the only pro would be if someone can communicate better orally versus in
yeah, I was
writing.
thinking the same thing, yeah.
Mhm.
And for me, it would, I personally, I wouldn't wanna interview them here, like, I would think like whoever the, you know, that small subcommittee is, like chair of this committee, superintendent. But that's what I was thinking too, like someone doesn't maybe express themselves well.
Jen, procedurally, and forgive me for asking these basic sort of questions, but how do you, how do you announce vacancies, or how do you convey publicly that there is an opportunity for someone to serve on this committee? So, and then just sort of, like, I'm curious as to what the process would be from interest in announcing vacancy, interest in the position, in serving on the committee, the application process, the interview process, and then ultimately the superintendent gets involved, and then so can you just sort of play that out for me?
Sure, so, and that's actually something that we talked about wanting to improve, because, so we've only done this once, and there was communication that went out, but I think we all feel like it was not well communicated. There was communication that went out from the district regarding the fact that applications listserv. We did some advertisement within the local newspapers that there was this new subcommittee. There was also communication around it in the local press when the subcommittee was formed. And then we had a Google form, if you were interested in participating, that you filled out. The applications were open for X amount of period of time. The applications were received, we compiled them, we sat down, we reviewed them, and then they were selected. That was pretty much what it was, but I think we all agreed that the notification for the application period was not well communicated. I think that's something that we need to do a better job, A, of communicating, B, communicating in a language other than just English, and also making sure that we communicated internally to the students, because I don't think the students were notified very well of their ability to participate, and doing it in multiple venues other than just a listserv.
Ironically, I had read the audit when I first started, and I just looked at it again, and, just to review and prepare myself for this meeting, but ironically, one of the issues identified in the audit was communication, right? With the whole issue of diversity and that sort of thing, so I guess that's something that we could, as a district, probably every district, but that as a district that could be improved, or needs to be improved. That's
Yeah.
one of the goals.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's gonna be something that I think we need to strategize on how we can do a better job with, getting the word out, once we do have the application open and ready to go. Any other thoughts, comments, feedback on the application?
Question 3, where it says IMA, mark only one, I think the students need to be differentiated, like, middle school.
Okay,
Otherwise, there's no way to capture what grade they're in.
okay. At down to the grade or just high school, middle school?
I would say down to the grade. If you were thinking, because say if you had a student, you knew you already had 3 students that were seniors, like you would wanna know if the applicant was a senior. Not that it would be but if you had 2, again, identical applicants, they were both amazing, they were both awesome, like you might choose to select the sophomore instead of the senior. So I would say, for students, I would go to grade level.
Okay.
Personally, if I can see it either way, but with that thought process of not stacking,
Yep.
grades.
Okay. Yes.
Are you just gonna put grade and then school under it? I'm just wondering, like, someone might be like, oh, URI in their community, like, how are you gonna?
Did you have logic? So if they select student, it would then give them a drop down?
Oh, we were not that fancy for
We
that.
can do this. I think you could have logic, so if if you selected, that other question about like teacher or, the one that has like the school prompt, like you could do the same thing, with, I can show you how to do it.
Parents too.
The parents too, yeah.
Yeah, whichever ones make sense, I think
Yeah.
we can build in.
So we have race, gender, orientation, and religion. Do we want to do anything about ability?
We could do that, yeah.
Again, though, I do think that it's important if you're collecting information regarding identity, like whenever I'm like creating a form or whenever I'm asking questions, like I always try to think about like, why am I asking this and like what impact is it gonna have on the process? And so, and we don't have to make this decision right this second, but like to your point and then Melissa's point, like if you're asking information, even if you're saying it's not being rubriced, your implicit bias is going to make it matter. And so unless you're rubricing it and it's part of the selection, like I think you should be really cautious about what we're adding or what we're not adding. If we are going to utilize that information in the selection process, that's fine, but you don't wanna just ask it, because then you're just adding some unknown biases. Just a thought.
But
I know it's a
think-
complicated one, but
It is, because I guess maybe, I don't know, like where you're coming from is like, we have these other questions, right,
Yeah.
about diversity, so
if you have those questions, you should have what you just brought up. But then I think I would challenge, I wasn't on the first iteration when you all did this, like challenge, like why are you asking those if you're not gonna use them?
Well, I think we did use
Yeah.
them, and we should use them.
Yeah.
And Melissa landed on here because of her strength, not because of,
Yeah.
her race, but I think we do not want a group full of white straight people making decisions about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, I mean, I think it makes sense to have those.
I mean, in defense of white people, if I may. I mean, but again, like, the questions of why, like, who I am is naturally gonna show up on the question of why or what's motivating me. And I am willing to, and I recognize maybe not every applicant will, but I am willing to share those pieces of me because that is part of my why.
Right.
When I talk about kind of how the demonstrated experience that connects specifically to the purpose of this committee, that will come out.
Right.
So even if I didn't have a box to check in my application, you might make this assumption that this is being written by a woman of color with this, family makeup and like stuff, so.
You wanna be careful on the other side though, that you don't wanna make assumptions the other way, and I'm gonna make an argument against what I just said, but I just think it's worth like us thinking about it. So for example, I identify straight, I am married to a man, it's my progression, and so, but I chair the LGBTQ subcommittee at my institution, and so you don't wanna go the opposite direction if you're not asking questions of assuming, my identity based on that, and so you just wanna be really careful on that. If you go both ways.
But like, in your application, you wouldn't write how you identify in terms of sexual orientation versus you would write,
Yeah.
this is a role that I've taken on, I'm
Yes.
making an assumption because I
Yeah.
know you, that because you believe in these
Yeah,
blah,
of
blah, blah,
course,
blah, blah.
yeah.
And, yeah.
It's just something to think about, if you remove those questions, then there's both
Yeah,
sides to
right,
it, and
yeah.
so I think just being really clear on how that information is gonna be used if we keep them, being very inclusive if we do keep them, and then just thinking through like, okay, if we do remove them, what that impact will be. Cause I do think it's important to have, good representation on a committee, especially one that's focusing on DEI, but I think just being really careful about, like, basically being transparent about why are we asking these questions, and are they gonna have an impact on my application, and if they are, that's okay, but I think we just wanna be transparent about that, but we kind of gone back and forth, we went back and forth on it, so.
Yeah, I think it's a super important issue, and it's a super tough issue to talk about and to decide on. So it makes me also think there are other issues that we get into similarly around, hopefully, about hiring faculty and diversity among faculty, right? And I don't know how that process is done. Are these questions of identity asked? Are they considered? I feel like they probably should be. As an example, for admissions committees in college anyway, the way we do it at my institution, I think it's similar to other institutions. You would know, right, Erin, for URI. What we do is it's sort of like if all else is equal, and of course all else never is equal, but theoretically, right? If all else is equal, then we work toward diversity of identity, right? But it's not like, well, that puts you at the top of the pile. It's like it's one consideration among many. And so I hear what you're saying. It's like I don't want to be thought of as like this is the reason why I'm here. At the same time, I completely agree with you, Jen, and I feel like similarly, if you looked at my application and I'm like, director for the Center for Health Equity, it's like, oh wow, this is the person we want. Well, it turns out he's a white male. Right now we've got a room full of, so like, I don't know. Personally, I would say, I would ask the question because I would want to consider it. It doesn't mean it moves you to the top of the pile, but it's part of the consideration explicitly. Because I do think there should be more diversity in this group.
I think adding the prefer not to answer helps because it gives the option of not answering any of these questions where that wasn't there before.
I bring up the ability and the maybe neurodivergence and stuff like that, just because I'm thinking of students who are sometimes taken out of, they have to leave class 5-7 minutes early to get to their next place, and what are they missing out on? Or if they are neurodivergent and they're pulled for testing, do they have any say in when they are given that testing? That's a type of voice that I didn't actually think of until just now.
It's important within the equity and
Yeah,
inclusion
it's very
conversation,
Their
of
lived
course.
experience
Yeah.
as
That's important.
students or parents of a
Yeah.
student.
And I think we made the decision deliberately to add a special ed rep into the committee makeup for those reasons. So I think it makes sense to add that as a
I guess, what do we decide, do we come to some conclusion about this issue, or are we gonna punt on it, or?
No, I had figured we would make a recommendation to the school committee on this also, so that we could present the
Yeah.
membership makeup and the application, with the hopes of, we had talked at the last meeting about being able to have this rolled out by September to be
Gotcha.
able to have, you know, a new makeup put together.
So I think the question that the subcommittee needs to make is, do we wanna leave the identity questions on the application? Right,
Oh,
so
sorry,
that's,
misunderstood.
no, so that's kinda like, I think what we're saying is that what we're
Okay.
deciding, cause I think
Okay.
I think I'm at least in agreement that if we are going to leave them, we should add the ones that Dave proposed. And so I think just making sure that the subcommittee says, yes, we should keep these on, and then if we are keeping them on, my recommendation would be is that we're transparent, that we are gonna use those as part of the consideration. And I'm comfortable with that as long as we're transparent about it, and I really like the point about, you know, that people don't have to disclose it, but I think just, if you're gonna ask a question and it is gonna matter, letting people know that that does matter, and that we're not just collecting it for demographic purposes, that it will be connected to their application.
Thoughts?
In the introduction to the application,
Yeah, I
could something be included that says we truly want to be as inclusive as possible? And this is why we're asking these questions.
What does everybody else think?
I would think that that would be the goal, right? I mean, that's, I think, really important. I mean, that this committee is well represented, in the way that, you know, the committee should be. So I would imagine that that would be pretty important.
Can we, and we talked about criteria, right, and can we, and again, you know, others may be as well, but I know my understanding, Aaron, is that you're involved, right, with admissions, and so aren't there statements used, like, we strive for diversity that are sort of saying, like, this is a goal for us to have, but in a way that doesn't say, like, you know, that's all we care about.
Yeah, I'm making my face because the Supreme Court and,
Yeah, right, we're waiting to hear,
this
right, see
could
what
be-
happens.
Yeah, no, it really matters, kind of what is
Yeah.
happening in the world right now,
I mean, the current
And the impacts
application
of that.
says seeks to include diverse perspectives.
I think the question is, so like, okay, I check all these boxes, I don't get on the committee, and I say, hey, is one of the reasons that I didn't get on the committee because I didn't fall into those identities? Like, I just want a very, like, transparent answer of like, yes, that was considered, and, you know, that you were a very qualified candidate, you know, that including your answers in X, Y, Z were considered in the application process. Like, if that's the case, then that's the case, and that's fine, I think it's important, but I think just being transparent about that is okay.
Well, I think that what's checked on those boxes is important, but to me anyways, the answers in 9, 10, and soon to be 11 are, to me, what are the more important things, because you could, it doesn't matter how you check those boxes, if your answer to number 9 is, I wanna serve on this subcommittee because, I don't know, I'm just looking for something to do to fill my Wednesday evenings, like, that's not gonna compel me to think that you're a wonderful addition to this committee. So that's the way I look at it.
I guess there's no answer to this right now, but if, like, I just wanna know what the rubric is, you know, like, that's where my head is, and that has to be created. That kinda also helps inform the application, I guess.
So
that's
should
kind
we
of the-
create the rubric and then come back to the application?
I would say that's also consistent with what you were saying earlier, which I agree with, Aaron, right, which is that if we're gonna ask questions, we should have reasons for asking those questions, and so the reasons are, you know, informed by the criteria for.
Yeah, the other thing you could do is if you wanted to collect demographic information and then applicant information, you could do that and deaggregate it before you review applicants. And so you could just review their questions and not know kind of what that impact is. And then once selections are made, you could look and say, okay, like, you know, that, you know, we're concerned about like the demographics X, Y, Z, like you could try to decouple them, but that's a challenge.
That's like,
It's not
that's
a-
what HR does, right?
Yeah.
Like when you
Yes.
apply, they take that information, but it's not part, and only like the HR person knows the demographic information and can tell us if your pool is diverse or not, and if we need to reopen it, so that's kind of.
It's a whole different level of
Yeah.
journey, but I do think, for the rubric, creating the rubric, obviously, I would imagine that you would have, like, rubrics of how they score the questions, exemplary, middle, weak, whatever we decide is the characteristics for each of the questions. And then, like, kind of back to the conversation that we're having, like, there would be a question of, like, kind of, does this person's identities fall into one of the protected categories as outlined as for the committee? Like, that would be the question mark of the rubric, like, otherwise it'd be pretty clear, since you're not bringing in any other factors other than how they answer the questions.
I'm sorry.
Mine is sort of related, but I wonder if just changing the order of the questions on the application would send the message that we prioritize the essay part over the separate demographic stuff at the bottom.
That's a good idea. Regardless, I think that's a good idea.
You could also state it too and say, like, the primary selection, like, for why people are on this committee is, how they answer the questions, and secondary consideration would go towards, the demographic makeup that they would bring to the committee, like, you could say something like that. Cause that's how I heard you tier it, right? Like, the most important thing is how they answer these questions and what their motivation is to be on X, Y, Z, but, like, there could be possible consideration, based on what folks are bringing to the table, to make sure that we have a diverse and inclusive committee. And I say that in the most broad sense with all the different possible characteristics that we propose. I do like that. I do love the idea of the flip-flop of the questions too.
And some of it too, though, it has to be how you answer the question, because, I'm a parent of a child of color, but you wouldn't get it in my demographic. And you wouldn't, unless I wrote about that. So my experience is unique in that way, so that's, not gonna come across like looking at me at the table. So, so some of that is,
Right.
like, has to be in the
questions,
like, yeah,
right.
so that needs to be the nugget then.
Yeah, and I think that's important too, is knowing that there's lots of, whomever sits, I've heard a couple times us refer to, like, this committee is not diverse, and in certain ways, maybe not, but in other ways, like, we're bringing different perspectives and different things to the table based on kind of that overall arching, equity inclusion lens.
And that's, I think,
Yeah.
where that describe the lived experience piece
Yeah.
came from, because even though, like, your checkboxes may not indicate that you have a lived experience, that your life indicates that you have one, and that's what came through in the questions, and that's why you're here, like, you know what I mean? So
I think we'll
that's-
still get that from the
Mhm.
change, how we changed it, right?
I agree, yeah.
I wonder if, as Erin said earlier, sometimes the interest in serving on a committee or something like that comes up in a general conversation, and then we spoke a little bit about the interview and how it would give people a chance to understand just what the positions mean and what serving would mean. I wonder if we send or include a link from this meeting in the application. Encourage people to say, if you wanna check out what a meeting's like, this is it. And like, be an easy way for them to determine if they are truly interested or not. And also give them a little bit of background on our discussion about the application process.
That's a good idea. You could also do, if you wanted, I keep going back to that, someone said something about, like, not everyone has strength in writing, and that there's like something there, and I wonder if, if the word interview is maybe too much, but maybe like a conversation with the subcommittee chairs or a meeting with the subcommittee chairs could be a middle ground option to allow folks to be able to kind of express some things that maybe they weren't able to in writing, but not have it be maybe not have it be evaluative, if that makes sense. And you could have a conversation but not have it be part of the selection process. If you wanted to.
Probably not though.
Like,
I know, you can't, I know.
could it be, Erin, like, could there be an open forum kind of thing at like a school committee meeting where the subcommittee is talked about and it's allowed a question and answer? So people who wanna ask that, or kind of have other things. And then the goal and how, you know, like, so if we encourage people to, you know, could that be something that we suggest? Or, you know, like where there's, like where we had those feedback sessions, but maybe, like.
Oh, yeah, you definitely, I mean, in an ideal world, if we were gonna do like, hey, we have all these subcommittee ones, I would love to have an open forum where people could come and ask questions and talk to the subcommittee chairs and that sort of thing, and that's a great idea. I definitely would like, I don't know if at the school committee meetings it would work, but something like that could work, where it's kind of like what we were doing with the office hours kind of vibe.
Yes, yep.
For them to be able to get information.
I wonder if instead of typing and writing, if we could have the option for people to answer through Flipgrid or something?
Or like through like
Through a video,
Yeah,
yeah.
like if you need like an accommodation for lack of a better term, like if you prefer to submit your application via video or whatever, you can do that.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Please make sure I answer the same question.
Yeah, as long as you answer the same questions, yeah, I mean.
You know, I would set, if you set a word limit for the word ones, you just set a time limit for the video ones to make sure that you're getting apples to apples.
Please don't send a half-hour video.
Yeah, well, you just wanna make sure that people don't have extra opportunity
Right.
that others might not. So that's something to consider too on the questions, maybe, not that you wanna limit, responses, but maybe putting some criteria for count, just so that you are comparing like, you know, 500 word statement to a 500 word
Yeah.
statement versus, cause that, you know, I don't know if you wanna be that specific, but just something to think about.
So do we feel like we need to come back to this at the next meeting with a rubric and go through that and then make the recommendation? Or do we feel like we can make a recommendation now? What do we think?
Do we have a meeting in August?
We have a meeting in August, we do not have one in July, we have one in August.
And the applications would go out in September or before school preferably?
It probably would not, because we would meet in August and then it would go to, we don't meet till the middle of August. So it would go to the school committee for the August 24th meeting and then, depending on how quickly they moved, I would say early September out at the earliest.
Can I just, like, I guess I would have a hard time knowing exactly what we're voting on, yes or no right now, but it sounds like, right, we've talked about moving the identity questions to the bottom of the form, adding questions about ability, or a question about ability, right? What else did we talk about? I'm just trying to think of like what we would be
Video
voting on.
option, video option.
Video options.
So we talked about, adding school and grade to the, and, changing the AMA to match the membership that we defined, in the other, adding if applicable to the I teach at, I have a child at, breaking up the race, question to include multiracial and Asian, adding a blank to self-define, and adding prefer not to answer to all the identity questions, changing the language on gender, from male to men and female to women, et cetera, for transgender as well. Adding a identity box for ability and adding the various abilities, and I'll look up the best practices for those. Changing question number 9 to please briefly share what is motivating you to want to serve on this subcommittee. Changing the additional question of please provide an example of a demonstrated experience to tie into the exact wording listed in strategy number 2. Adding a note about how the responses to this form are subject to the open records request. Making sure that when the form is sent out that it provides you with a copy. Noting that the form will be available in Spanish as well. Flip-flopping the order of the questions and the text questions and the checkbox questions. Noting somewhere in there that the primary selection is the answer to the questions, that the secondary consideration is demographic makeup, and adding a criteria for like a word count and noting that video response is acceptable. I think that's everything in terms of that.
Point of clarification. So, and forgive me if I'm missing something. So every individual interested in serving on the committee would go through this application process.
Yes.
So a sixth grader then would have to go through this process? I guess I'm just having a difficult time, like, imagining a middle school student answering all those questions. Does anyone else feel that way?
Well, I do, but we
You know what I mean? Like, I just, I'm not saying, maybe it's just me, I just,
I mean,
I think,
well,
I
Chloe
think-
answered that, right? Like,
Oh, we did,
she
yeah.
had the same in Alexis.
Well, so one of the questions,
that may be fine, I'm just
yeah, it's a valid question.
putting that out there.
I think that the answers may not be as sophisticated, certainly, but, you know, I taught middle school for 30 years, and I absolutely think that they're capable of expressing themselves and why they want to be here, why they want their voices heard. So whether that be in writing, or whether it be a conversation, or whether they do video, or, you know,
Do you
I
think, and again, I'm just putting this out there, because I think it's wonderful, by the way, that this committee exists, and I think it's important. Have you considered that the process may be a deterrent in any way?
In what way do you think it?
Well,
might be?
I mean, that there may be individuals, let's just say specifically students, that may be inhibited in providing all of this very deeply personal information.
None of the questions are mandatory in terms of the demographic information. The only ones that are mandatory would be the questions about why they want to be on the committee.
I just want
Yeah, it's a
to
valid-
put that out there. I mean, I
I was
just,
thinking of that when I said prefer not to answer as well. I was thinking of that child that might not know or just doesn't wanna put it out there yet. They may have spoken with their family, they may have spoken with their friends, but maybe not
Right.
publicly.
I hear that, and I get to the challenge of like the transparency piece though, like how do we honor that, but we still need a system in some way to
Oh,
capture
yeah,
this information.
I-
People question
Yeah.
why any of us are on the commission.
Yeah. Oh, I
So,
understand.
yeah,
Well, if you look at the questions, like, I'm thinking of like, how would, like, I have an 8-year-old, so like, how would an 8-year-old answer this? Like, I think to your point, like, you know, what's an example of demonstrated experience advocating for an issue, like, in your life? Like, I feel like a younger student might talk about how they stood up for a friend in the cafeteria, or noticed something and told their teacher, or, you know, like, you get, I think, age answers, but I think they'd be able to articulate something, you know, or, you know, like, why do you wanna be in this committee? Because I wanna make it better for my friends. You know, like, you'd get, I think, cuter, nicer answers, although mine would be like that too. But, you know, like, I think it would just be different. But I do think the questions, as far as like, maybe we can look and see like grade level wise, like making sure that we're using words that they would understand. Like, if there's a simpler word we could use and that would be inclusive of all, like, going, you know, maybe having someone that understands that reading level, take a look at the questions might help be helpful. But I think, as far as the content, I think we would just get what they would provide, and then we could assess it as such.
And I also think you're not gonna get an application from a student who doesn't want to be on this committee,
Mhm.
like.
I think any student who is highly motivated to have their voices heard, to be part of an agent of change, and who is living this experience, this is not a deterrent at all. I think they see it as an opportunity, and many students have said to me, I didn't even know that there was a committee, and how do I get on it? And, you know, I have things to say, so I would like to be heard.
The one thing, here in what you just said, Dave, about students may have, you know, have a conversation with certain people, not others, but I think we should add to the top of this form that minors will need parental permission to serve on the
Yes.
committee in case that is a deterrent to anybody applying.
Yes.
So I think we should add that.
And our school groups that we have, if we have a GSA or if we have a racial equity, something going on, those always spout from one more spring up from the kids. The kids always reach out to an adult in the building first. It might be the guidance counselor, or it might be an assistant principal or someone, or a teacher. And once the kids express interest, that's when those groups begin. It doesn't ever, I don't think, come
No.
top down. It's
Yeah.
always student interest first. So they are, and we have had them in the middle school, so the kids do speak up and advocate for themselves.
So just, I guess, coming back to Jen, no, I mean, I think obviously this is important issue, I don't wanna cut it off, but as far as vote, do we vote or do we not vote?
I'm gonna say let's table this.
Yeah,
I'm
that-
gonna put together a draft. I would like a teacher to review it for language, and then we can bring it back at the next meeting. And I'm gonna hold on the membership, because I think it makes sense to put them both through at the same time.
What was the last thing you're gonna hold on the member,
The membership makeup, because I think it makes sense to submit them
Yeah,
both
so
at the
that's,
same time.
like, putting forward one without the other,
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't
there's,
make
it's not
sense.
gonna advance the work,
Yeah.
yeah.
And also, just to clarify, like, we've thrown around the word rubric,
Mhm.
and that certainly comes from criteria, but they're
Yes.
slightly different things, right? So like the criteria is like sort of more theoretical or abstract, and it sounds like similar to what you talked about putting at the top of the form, that like our first, the first thing is how you respond to these and then we'll also be looking to have a diverse group makeup of the committee. So I think the wording of that is important, right? Like that's
Yeah.
not straightforward, you know? But then there's also a rubric, which
Yeah,
would be
if
different
anybody
than.
would like to take a
right,
stab at a rubric, that would be amazing. But we'll try to have a draft of that for the next meeting as well. Is there
And would the
anything-
rubric be published with the applications? Like, would people know what's on this rubric and what are they looking for? I mean,
Do people usually see a rubric? at
That's,
this time?
that's what I was thinking, at least the
yeah,
criteria.
when I
maybe,
sign a
if not the
paper,
rubric.
this is the
Mhm.
rubric,
Okay,
you know,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah,
They need
okay.
to know what is being looked for
Yeah.
and
That's
how it's
the
being,
whole
you
point
know,
of the rubric.
how am I being graded?
Right.
Right.
You know, what counts here? What am I doing? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, you don't have to always, no, I've been through processes where the rubric isn't like publicized, like you don't actually see the checkboxy rubric, but it says like applicants will be, reviewed on X, Y, and Z.
Right, and
You know,
that's what I
at
was
least
thinking about the
that piece of
criteria,
it.
right?
So I don't know if
Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
actual
Yeah.
rubric,
Right.
but at least like, hey, like when the people that are selecting
Some
the
kind
people
of
for this
qualifier.
committee, these are the things that they're gonna
Yeah.
be considering. Just something, I think that's transparent enough, I don't think you have to have the exact,
Yeah.
checkbox.
That's what I meant by criteria, I wasn't being clear, but that's exactly what I meant by like criteria, and how your rubric would be derived from that, but the rubrics would be more specific.